Hello, this is Father David, here with day 5 of the Lenten spring. If I forget you, O Jerusalem. Now I'm recording these maybe a couple of days after we've stopped singing this song in church. This is directly from a psalm. This title of this chapter is from a psalm, Psalm 137, that is usually known as from by the waters of Babylon. And it's a psalm that we sing in the Sundays, the liturgies leading up to Lent. Actually, we're supposed to sing it in matins, the morning prayers prior to liturgy, but in usually parish practices, it's done usually right before communion. And I'm really, not surprised, because yesterday we talked about the prodigal son, the return to the Father. And this is really a continuation of that theme, but it's done so in actual history. This song is written about not a parable where a son has gone off, by himself into a far country and he finds himself feeding the pigs. This is an actual exile, the Babylonian exile, where the people of Israel were captured and they were taken away into slavery, into Babylon. And this is a song of mourning. And we sing this on those Sundays getting ready for Great Lent. I'm sure there's a reason, but we don't sing it during Lent, which would to me also seem to be a time of exile. But the church has prescribed it for before, really to get us thinking in terms of exile. We remembered yesterday of the pig pen in the prodigal son. And now this psalm, which begins, by the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion, their home, Israel. On the willows there we hung up our lyres, or our harps, sometimes it's translated. For there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." And so this was they're taunting them, making fun of them. We've captured you. We won. So go ahead, sing your songs of victory. How are you going to do that? Where's your God now? Kind of a thing. And then the psalm continues, how shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? For these people, for the Israelites, this was hugely important, because we don't usually think of this as Christians in terms of your worship being tied to a location. But in the ancient Near East, that was exactly the point, was that your God really could only be properly worshipped in the land that he gave you. And so, Israel, in that sense, was no different. They had been promised a land that the God of Israel, Yahweh, would show them, would bring them to. They'd drive out their enemies in front of them, and they would possess the land. And then they would set up first the tabernacle, which kind of traveled with them as they went, and then the temple. And there were a few versions of that. But it was in Jerusalem, which they nicknamed Zion, the city of God, the city of the God of Israel. And the temple was there, and their worship was only properly and completely, fully done there. Well, now they're taken away out of their land. And this, for a lot of Christians, it'd be like, well, I've got some prayers memorized. I could just, if people, kidnapped me and took me someplace else, I could just, maybe I got an icon. I don't know, take an icon with me, set it up, and say my prayers, In a sense, because Christ told us, we will worship him in spirit and in truth. and not on this mountain or that mountain or this city or anything like that. It would be disconnected from one particular land. But in that time, it was crucial that they have their land. So this was a big deal. They felt really acutely this sense of what a loss this is, to be away from our land, and now we somehow have to worship our God. How does that even work? It's as if your God has been defeated by this other more powerful God, that because he's more powerful, comes in and he, takes over the land. The God takes over the land, the God's more powerful. So it's this sense of exile that we're called to remember and really embody. Again, that this world that we are living in, as good as it is, and I feel like, I was never a student of Father Thomas or of Father Alexander Schmemann, sadly, at school anyway, but you feel like sort of their student. I owe quite a lot to their teaching, and they often stressed on purpose, we have to remember the goodness of this world, the inherent goodness of this world, the inherent goodness that is within human beings, because it's easy to forget, especially with all of our necessary talk of sin and having things twisted, that our problem is not with the world. It isn't that we completely reject the good creation of God that he's made, or people, but it's that we recognize that this world as it exists now is always going to be at odds, at least in many respects, with the plan of God to correct it, to fix it, to renew it. And so in that sense, that the world, that we find ourselves in the world at odds against, the use of the world, the self-understanding of people in the world and all of this, we are in exile. We are not home. And, we have in the book of Revelation, Apocalypse, the last book of the Bible, a vision where heaven and earth descend and they're united, a new heaven and a new earth, and they are united. And there is now no longer any separation of any kind between God and man, between earth and heaven. And what we pray in the Our Father every day, forgive it, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Well, right now, we know that ain't gonna happen in its fullness. Not until the last day. But we stand ready. We recognize that it ain't happening. His will is not done on earth as it is in heaven. But this is what we strive to do until that day that it happens and our exile is over. But there's something, and I'll just touch on here at the last part, in this psalm of exile by the waters of Babylon, that, it's probably definitely the most misunderstood part of this psalm, and it's the very last line. It really shows the Israelites' anger, and somebody's actually used the word bloodlust at this point. The desire for vengeance on the people who've, killed their soldiers, taken their women and children captive. And they say, O daughter of Babylon, you devastator, you destructive one. Happy shall he be who requites you, who pays you back for what you've done to us. Happy shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rocks. Splits their heads open against the rocks, in other words. How in the world does a Christian justify, violence against little ones? Okay. The reality of this is that we face a lot of violence within the Old Testament. The New Testament is clear That the Old Testament was God working with his people in the days that they existed. And they were fighting in a bloody dog-eat-dog world. And their law, which said eye for eye, tooth for tooth, it kept them from taking total vengeance and annihilation on their enemies. So their thinking at this point was, you've killed our children. You've killed our women and our soldiers. Happy will he be who pays you back with justice. Now, obviously, as Christians, we are governed by a different rule. However, the interpretation of this verse is something that is done throughout all of Christian history. It's not trying to paint over the very real, the reality that they had to confront in Israel in those days. And we can say, we don't do that under the instructions of Christ himself, who's taught us a more excellent way, as St. Paul says. In that sense, we have very much shifted. But what we do is we look at these scriptures and we understand them, metaphorically. We bring out a different meaning. For Christians, who's Babylon? For us, Babylon is, this world. It could be, in other words, the devil, the demons, okay? And there is and Father Thomas goes into, all of these, Babylon, which the wicked have made, and he quotes a hymn at the end of the chapter. It says, blinded by a sensual pleasure, I bear within me a darkened soul, and the crafty enemy laughs when he sees me. Give me light, O Christ, and deliver me forever from his malice. So we have the temptation of the devil, of the demons. We should remember we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. Other people aren't the problem. It's these influences that can not possess us as Christians, but influence us, suggest things to us. And oftentimes those thoughts can come in as little suggestions, or, if you will, little ones. And we're taught to take these thoughts when they're little and dash them against the rock, who is Christ. And that's, St. Paul says, the rock, you hear the rock. We think that's Jesus Christ. Our interpretive understanding of the Old Testament says you have to really mind your thoughts. Think about what you're thinking about. And when you realize that a thought is just in its infancy, it's just coming into your mind, into your heart, root it out at that point while it's little and dash it against the rock of Christ. You can do this with the Jesus prayer. You can do this through the reading of Scripture, the reading of Psalms themselves, through silence, through meditation, through attending the services, through just, honestly, distracting yourself with something else that's a charitable work. But this is what we mean when we realize we're here in Babylon, the land that is run by these sinful suggestions and the thoughts, the demons working behind the scenes. And now we're called to find those little ones, of the ones who've tried to take us captive. And even as we wait for the liberation by our Messiah, by our God, our ultimate liberation from this world at his second coming, we take the little ones of Babylon, those destructive thoughts, and we dash them against the stone of Christ. So as we continue through our Lenten journey here in the Babylon of this world, may we remember a place we've never been, our Zion, our Jerusalem, our heavenly home, and prepare ourselves for the day when our God will set all aright and we will be home again. So So may God bless you, and Lord willing, we'll see you tomorrow.